nothing will change with the same people and same policies that got us into the status quo, another Latin word, status quo, and it stands for, man, the middle class, everyday Americans are really getting taken for a ride. That's status quo. And GOP leaders, by the way, you know, the man can only ride you when your back is bent, so strengthen it. Then the man can't ride you. American won't be taken for a ride because so much is at stake. And we can't afford politicians playing games like nothing more is at stake than, oh, maybe just the next standing of theirs in the next election.
Well, on the subject of voter suppression, we're going to bring in one of the most successful politicians in modern times to actually break through the two-party paradigm. We're joined now by former Minnesota governor and host of Off the Grid, Jesse Ventura. Jesse, thanks for being on with us.
Hi, Ben. Great to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about the third-party limitations here. I got to tell you, I just tweeted out tonight, using the hashtag, by the way, not just two parties. NBC News tonight is calling Adrian Wiley in the Florida governor's race an independent, rather than even mentioning that he's a libertarian candidate. They have it on the screen. It's a Republican, Democrat, independent. You know, your success in becoming governor of Minnesota was fighting to break through the system. Do you feel for guys like Adrian Wiley when he's trying to do the same thing here?
Well, you know, I wish him well. It's a very difficult task. You know, the main thing, the key to any election is being involved in the debates. If the Democrats and Republicans exclude you from the debates, you have no chance at all to win. If they include you in the debates, then you have the opportunity. That's what happened to me. I was polling 10% at the primary. I was included in the debates, and 8 weeks later, I got 37% and won the governorship of Minnesota because I was allowed to compete. Well, Democrats and Republicans don't want to see that again, so they eliminate any third option from any debates. And that's the key. You have to be in the debates.
And they keep sliding the line, the marker on the debates as well.
They keep sliding the line. And something that I found interesting, Ben, you brought this up with Wiley, and, you know, Jesse, I know you've had some experience with this as well. But part of me thinks that, you know, independent is now becoming a synonym for libertarian. Do you think that's the case at all, or not?
Well, I don't know. You got two brands of libertarians, too. You got the capital libertarians that kind of believe in anarchy, and then you got the small libertarian, small L, who understand that there's a role for government. They just feel that it's too encompassing and goes into too much of our lives. So I wouldn't say necessarily it's libertarian. You know, it's a difficult thing. When I won in Minnesota, we were at that time the mecca of the third-party movement. We actually had, I think, 3 or 4 parties that were considered major because you only have to get 5% of a statewide vote to be considered major. I tried to bring the Libertarians, the Greens, my Independence Party, all of us together. It was like trying to herd cats. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, good luck with that.
You know, they all had their individual agendas. And I said, look, we can all agree on one thing, campaign finance. None of us take the dirty money. Can't we build from there and come up with one candidate that we can all endorse, which instead of dividing our vote 3 or 4 ways, if we consume it into one, we're going to be a lot more successful. But it was so difficult, I just gave up on it because I had to do the job of governing.
It's a big job, too. Now, Jesse, there's a lot of talk about voter suppression in the media, but isn't our media part of that suppression when they don't talk about viable candidates, you know, kind of like we're discussing?
That's way more is them not talking about other candidates. We did a study in Minnesota, and voter fraud is virtually non-existent. Let me put it to you in layman terms. Have you ever met anyone who's committed voter fraud?
No.
No.
I haven't.
No. You have? You're the first person.
No,
I
haven't. I haven't. Yeah.
I haven't either. But yet I've met people that have drunk drive. I've met people that have been spouse abusers. I've met people that have robbed places. I've met all these other criminals. I have never once in my lifetime met someone who on election day went out and said, you know what? I'm going to try to vote in a different district and see if I can get away with it.
But you know, Jesse,
we're lucky to get 50% of our population to even vote.
Well, no, and that's
true.
Let me ask you this. Because Election fraud, though, there are, some serious, significant issues with it. Not in the way that, media talks about it and politicians talk about it. We talk about IDs at voting locations, and that's all bull. We know that. But if we're sincere when we talk about it, there are issues like black box voting, electronic voting machines that could be hacked. I mean, there are significant issues that media never talks about.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I was getting to that. I said, if there's going to be voter fraud, it isn't going to come from some poor person, down the street. And it's going to come major league. It's going to come through these computerized voting machines that can be hacked. And I believe there's already been major voter fraud with those hacked computer. People need to go back like Minnesota does with the individual ballots where you fill in the circle. Look at it this way. You've been doing that since first grade. If you're not capable of filling in a circle, you probably shouldn't vote anyway.
Well put, Jesse. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. It's always really fun talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
If it wasn't for WikiLeaks, the deep state would be more effective. And if it wasn't for independent and social media, the corporate state media would likely exercise more control over the minds of the masses. Now, fortunately, while we do live in dark times, there are pockets of light everywhere. The Caracas cable leak may be one of the most valuable leaks for Canadians. Now, this was primarily concerned with deep state involvement in Venezuela. However, this cable does make a passing reference to party renovation, as performed in many countries, such as Canada. But what does all of this really mean? Well, let's take a step back and think about how somebody like Stephen Harper could have risen to power. He is, after all, the perfect politician. He's cold, ideological, willing to backstab and work his way up through the hierarchy. Now, these traits don't produce much value for people. Therefore, he never would have risen very far in a free market, albeit in one of the controlled crony capitalist organizations of the New World Order, which obviously isn't a part of the free market anyways. But in politics, these kinds of characteristics equal results. And as Friedrich Hayek wrote in The Road to Serfdom, in politics, it's the worst who rise to the top. Now, Stephen Harper embodies this notion. But how could a party like the Conservative Party win? While I personally believe in a voluntarist society, the fact is that there is a Canadian culture that many Canadians fervently support. Now, this includes peacekeeping abroad, universal health care, gun control, and generally the social safety net. Now, I didn't say these were good Canadian traits, but these are the cultural benefits that defined the nation. So how could someone with the neoconservative ideology of the Republican Party not only become the leader of the party, but the prime minister? Well, when Stephen Harper went to the Bilderberg meeting in 2003, he was virtually unknown at the time. Just another opposition leader of that fringe right-wing party, which would likely never enjoy the reins of power. But yet, here he was attending Bilderberg in Versailles, France in 2003. Now, although Harper wouldn't become prime minister until 3 years later in 2006, it's clear that by 2003, the Bilderbergers had big plans for both Canada and the Conservative Party. And it started with the vetting of Stephen Harper. So what are the specifics of all this? Well, of course, we can never know what conversations took place between Stephen Harper and the Bilderbergers, but thanks to WikiLeaks, we can see the channels that the elites used to get Harper and the neocons into power. Now, the International Republican Institute, or the IRI, funded by the United States Agency for International Development, or the USAID, is an offshoot of the CIA. And the WikiLeaks cable attests to the IRI's involvement with Canada's domestic politics. The National Endowment for Democracy, or NED, is involved as well. And what did they do? Well, they facilitated the merger of the Progressive Conservative Party with the Alliance Party. The former, of course, is the party of Sir John A. Macdonald, sometimes called the Red Tories. These conservatives are traditionally classically liberal, but with a socially conservative bent. And of course, like every party in the 20th century, they unfortunately just progressed more and more to dissolve out statism. The Alliance Party, on the other hand, does have more in common with the Republican Party to the south, but more important, they were the unofficial Western Bloc Party of Canada. And former Liberal Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau alienated the West with his overtly socialist policies, his nationalization of Alberta's oil, and majority governments based off of votes in Ontario and Quebec. Actually, Trudeau proved that if you have Ontario and Quebec on your side, well, you can practically govern the entire country, despite massive unpopularity in the West. So this Western alienation did continue throughout the 1980s and right throughout the 90s. The Progressive Conservative Party were in power during the Reagan years, and despite the friendly relationship with the Reagan government, as well the denationalization of Alberta's oil, the PC government would prove to be widely unpopular across the political spectrum. Now, in the 1993 election, the PC party was decimated to just a total of 2 seats in the House of Commons. Meanwhile, the Alliance just surged in popularity, but not enough to counteract the liberal stronghold that was currently in central Canada. So for the next 13 years, Canada was more or less a one-party state, and as the right-wing vote was split amongst 2 parties. This was the catalyst the IRI needed to implement their agenda. The merger of the Progressive Conservatives and the Alliance Party is the party renovation that the WikiLeaks cable speaks of. The goal was to introduce the neoconservative philosophy into Canada. See, this is what Harper meant when, back in 2006, he announced that you won't recognize Canada when I'm through with it. So what is neoconservatism? Well, believe it or not, they are the followers of Leon Trotsky, the Russian revolutionary that was murdered in Mexico by a Stalin assassin. Now, it might seem counterintuitive to think that left-wing intellectuals would co-opt a conservative movement, but of course, this isn't about left versus right. It's about the state versus you. The Trotskyists believed in a worldwide revolution called the permanent revolution in Marxist theory. And although the neocons aren't openly socialists or even Marxists, they promote this permanent revolution. They actually believe in a government-controlled form of capitalism, the global empire, perpetual war, the police state, the surveillance state, central banking, and supreme executive power, such as, for example, the Prime Minister's office. Now, the neoconservative transformation of America certainly didn't start with George W. Bush, and it certainly didn't end there. This is the ideology of the deep state, and they are not going to stop at anything to implement their agenda worldwide. Harper is just merely the pawn that they needed for Canada's transformation. Under Harper's 10 years of rule, we've seen our international peacekeeping status just turned into wars of aggression. Military and police worship are promoted as Canada undeniably moves closer to a regime resembling the fascist dictatorships of Europe in the 1930s. And on the international stage, Canada is now just merely another arm of the military-industrial complex. We've invaded Afghanistan and Libya. We support ISIS in Syria, but we fight them in Iraq. And we demonize Russia and Iran for merely looking out for their national interests. And as Paul Ferrier, a political scientist at the University of Calgary, has shown, this isn't just Harper's doing. Blind intelligence to the military began under Chrétien, and it was just around that time that Bush Sr. was talking about a new world order. Now, recently, the Harper government has also exploited the death of Corporal Cirillo and the Parliament building shooting. He's falsely conflated the murder with Islamic terrorism, and he's now using it as a pretext to wage more warfare in the Middle East. Now, I've often heard it said that Harper is the George W. Bush of Canada. And that may be true, but then if it is, that makes Justin Trudeau our Barack Obama. And if you look at the United States, you'll see that not only has Obama continued Bush's wars and his police state, well, he's increased it tenfold. And the same will happen in Canada. The politics of the deep state remain behind the shadows. See, they decide who wins and loses. Elections only give this illusion of choice. They don't change the deep state. Stephen Harper rose to power because he's a good politician. He possesses all of the characteristics needed to rise to the top. And remember, it's only the worst that rise to the top. But Harper also rose to power because of Bilderberg. Through the CIA front, the IRI, they saw their opportunity to bring neoconservatism into Canada. And now that this virus is here, it's going to take a lot of work to get rid of it. There is no one cure-all solution. All I can do is share this information and encourage you to do research yourself and to share it with your friends and your family. If you do feel compelled to vote, don't bother with the Liberals or the Conservatives or even the NDP, because these parties are all bought and paid for. They don't represent us, and they never will. Sweeping out one statist for another is not the solution to the neoconservative virus. It's literally the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, like voting, and expecting a different result. We've seen Barack Obama continue the wars of aggression, the police state, and everything else that the neoconservatives have become known for. So mark my words, guys, Justin Trudeau will be an extension of the Harper government. There may be superficial differences, like legalizing cannabis, but when it comes to the fundamental issues at stake, the issues that threatened our liberty and way of life, both men are pawns of the New World Order. You look behind the curtain. Real power rests with the Bilderberg Group and the deep state.